Hello. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. My name is Neil Parekh. My co-host is Don Helmrich, and our guest this for this episode is Jim Neuburg. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and my website. We're in fact live on both my Facebook and Don's Facebook accounts, and on both of our Instagram accounts. I'm hoping we're live on Jim's Facebook as well, and we'll see whether his friends can see him there or not. But either way, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. This is the third episode of this show that Don and I started. Oh my God, Dawn, it's our third episode. Um, we're focusing on mental health issues. Our goal is to try and reduce the stigma around mental health. Um, a lot of the focus around anxiety and depression. And I think one of the things that we'll just jump off to talk about is, the first two episodes, our episode, and then Candace Sanchez. Um, our anxiety and depression, really has roots in trauma for all three of us. Um, but Jim's anxiety and depression comes from a different space. Um, and I think that'll be interesting for folks. Um, Dawn, thank you for being my co-host.
Thank you for letting me be your co-host. It's been great. The last two shows have been wonderful. I'm very excited about today's show. Obviously, for those who don't know, the guest today happens to be my fiance and the person that I get to marry in a couple of months, and I'm super excited about that. So I'm really glad that that he agreed to be on the show.
Yeah, it's really great. And I'm thrilled. It's a really interesting show. Again, we're talking about introverts, extroverts, anxiety and depression, and in Jim's case, addiction. I always want to say it with a spoiler alert because he has been sober for 20 years, and that is so incredible and so wonderful. I had the pleasure of meeting Jim when I was in Milwaukee last year. Don and I have been close friends for a number of years now, but I am just thrilled for both of you, Don. The fact that you're getting married soon, and the fact that you're on the show. It's really great. As we mentioned earlier, a lot of the our background with anxiety and depression come from our experience with trauma. I want to thank Candace Sanchez for the show she has, Unspoken Conversations with Candace. Last year, she dedicated season 3 of her show to male survivors of sexual abuse, people like me. I was abused by a neighbor when I was 7 years old, and it was from co hosting that show with her and interviewing uh, other men who had similar experiences. We kept mental health kept coming up as a topic, and I actually for years uh, did not feel comfortable talking about mental health, about anxiety and depression, the fact that I saw a therapist. I was actually more comfortable talking about my experience as a survivor, but I pushed myself to launch this show. And the first blog post I wrote, I suffer from anxiety and occasional depression. I don't want to feel embarrassed about anxiety. I don't want to feel embarrassed about depression. Um, just saying those words were just huge for me, and I found myself in conversation with people sharing that information. And last year's show really gave me the strength to do that. Um, I want to acknowledge a few folks who are watching, Dawn, before we go into your background and kind of
Sure.
what your experience has been. Colleague of mine, Apollo, is watching from Philadelphia on Twitter. Thank you, Apollo, for being such a loyal watcher, a great supporter from Digimentors, this the who is which is producing the show pro bono, and we'll acknowledge them a little bit more later. Steve Taylor is watching from Philadelphia. Now, I'm going to take a moment because Steve is another close friend from Digimentors, but I actually talked to Steve about this show in November, just before I called you, Dawn. Steve was my first conversation, and we had some time in the car. I was driving him home, and I kicked around this idea. And Steve, look what's come of this. So thank you for that early encouragement, and I'm still hoping to get you on an episode later depending on when the timing is right. Uh, Jonathan is watching from the East Village. It only took 3 episodes, but our schedules finally coincided. Jonathan is a loyal viewer of a lot of the programs that we produce through Digimentors, our Sunday New York Times read along, and Sri's shows that he did. And Jonathan, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Rochelle is watching from Hastings on Hudson, my mom's neighbor. I left town before she moved in, but she's still family. They've adopted my mom, which is really nice. Rochelle, thank you so much. And she herself is, and I want to make sure I get this right, what I think was a school psychologist. Please correct me in the comments, Rochelle. And if we get a chance to have you on the show, that would be wonderful. Um, Stefan Kaplan is joining. He's saying hi to both of us. Wonderful to be here. Stefan is actually going to be on the show. We already have a date certain. I believe it's in May, if I'm not mistaken. Stefan, thank you so much. You want to give a shout out to our next viewer, Dawn? You might know her.
I do. Brittany Helmrich, who happens to be my daughter, is watching, and I'm so glad to see that she's joining us today.
And Steve says he's excited to see the show happening. Would still love to be a guest, so we'll definitely follow up afterward. So Dawn, I want to throw it to you a little bit in terms of what your background with anxiety and depression has been, and kind of what the show means to you.
Sure. Yeah, so I've experienced anxiety, depression, PTSD. I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I was kidnapped, robbed, and raped when I was 21 years old. So this is a long, long journey for me. This has been over 30 years that I've spent in my life dealing with anxiety and depression. And I was really excited when Neil he called me up and asked me if I might be interested in being a guest, and somehow I kind of weaseled my way into co-hosting the show with him. It's a really big passion of mine. As Neil knows, I talk about it a lot on my Facebook page, probably to a fault. I talk a lot about when I'm experiencing anxiety or depression, or when I'm having trouble coping or getting out of bed. It's kind of my platform that I use. So I am thrilled to be able to do this.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Really appreciate it. And again, having that support. This is the first thing that my colleague Sri mentioned when I came to him with the idea of the show. He said, "Find yourself a co-host." And when I called you, I was calling just as a whether you'd be on the show, but when you offered, I jumped at the chance to have you go down this journey with me. I want to take a moment and acknowledge Digimentors. Digimentors is the firm that I work with, and Sri Srinivasan is the co-founder. Um, I am so thankful that they are helping me and supporting me in doing this show. There's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of software that we use to make sure this works. And so I appreciate all of the support that not only that I have from our leadership, but as you saw from the comments, it's a lot of my Digimentors colleagues who are helping to amplify the show and share the show, and are coming in and watching. So thank you very much. At Digimentors, we do digital marketing, events and programs like this, strategic communications, trainings, workshops. We help with staffing and recruiting. We also do event amplification and AI workshops. So if you're interested in any of that, let me know. You can reach out to me. You can visit our website, and we'd love to work with you on a project. Um, so with that, I want to talk a little bit about this topic today: introverts, extroverts, and anxiety and depression, which is really kind of the subtext. Um, the spoiler alert, the other spoiler alert, I guess. Dawn is an extrovert. Jim, her fiance, is an introvert. I'm very much an extrovert, and I live. My wife, for those of you who know, Pam, is very much a social introvert. Introvert. She's okay with small groups of people. Not you know she's not on Facebook. She doesn't understand why I'm doing the show. She supports me, and she's had people talk to her about how important it is, but she doesn't understand the idea of kind of being out there like this. What's interesting is that my daughter Emily is very much an extrovert. So we have all this kind of in the mix. Um, I did not write a blog post this week for this show, and it eats at me that I didn't. But it only was in the last 24 hours that I started kind of really understanding or kind of wrapping my mind around what some of these issues are, and so I just want to take a moment to share that perspective. There are two incidents or two things that I did in the last few days that are just typical for me. I was at a board meeting for my Unitarian church, and after the board meeting was over, I still talked with people in the parking lot for another hour and a half. I didn't leave there until 10:30 at night. Um, I wanted to be part of the conversation. I wanted to. There was a bit of FOMO. There was a lot of things going on with our church. Um, but the whole time I'm thinking to myself, Neil, go home, go home. Like I had so much work to do. It was just getting me. And so when I got home, my anxiety went through the roof because I knew how behind I was. Same thing happened today. About a month ago, I signed up to go to my daughter's school to volunteer at lunchtime to help out in the cafeteria. They want dads to kind of be a presence there. And going into the day, I knew that this was going to be a problem. I did it, but it didn't help my mental health, my balance. So I'm kind of struggling with this being an extrovert and it ramping up my anxiety. And I know for certain that my freshman year of college um, imploded because of this same mix of being an extrovert and having anxiety and depression underneath. So it's a really kind of interesting balance. Dawn, your blog post, which you did write, um, focused on an extrovert struggles with anxiety and depression. The way I deal with anxiety and depression is to keep myself so busy that I don't have to think about my feelings. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So, I anybody who knows me knows that I have my hands in about 16 different buckets all at the same time. I right now currently I have four different jobs, two of which I get paid for, two of which I don't. I am constantly on the go. I find it very, very difficult to stop and take a break, to take a breath, to relax. And that is even more so when my anxiety and my depression is really high, um, because I don't like to sit with my feelings. It's uncomfortable for me. And you're going to be hearing from Jim very shortly. And one of the things that I had to learn really quickly is that the way that Jim deals with his anxiety and depression is that he needs time, and being able to give him that time is something that I've really had to learn. I have a daughter who is an extra introvert, so she's an extrovert, but she has her moments that she needs to be alone and kind of to be an introvert. And I have a son who's a very introverted introvert. So I do understand from my son's perspective that kind of turning inward for him. But I really try to balance out my ability to um, do a whole bunch of stuff, but also stop and take a breath. And Jim has actually been very instrumental in helping me learn how to take a nap, which I didn't know was a thing that was really cool and existed and like is very healthy for you. And it is not a time waster because that's how I always looked at it. So yeah, for me, finding that balance between constantly having to do something and taking a breath is really important.
And I have a question running at the bottom of the screen. We have a number of people who already answered the question before I put it up because I knew that we were going to go there. I'm curious in terms of whether people are an introvert or an extrovert. And if you can share that in the comments, we will make sure to bring them on screen. I want to just acknowledge there are a number of comments that are come in. I want to bring Jim on screen in just a moment, but I do want to acknowledge my mom for watching because she's watching from
Hi,
Hastings on
Mom.
Hudson. My mom has been an incredible source of support, as has my sister. So I'm taking some producer prerogative to acknowledge family. And Brittany gave kudos for the fancy production. So I'll take that from Brittany. And I had a chance to meet Brittany as well when I was out there. Everyone else who's commented, folks, Dr. Tachi from Fort Lauderdale and Rose from Connecticut, I will get you on the screen in a little bit. Please hang in there and let us know, what your thoughts are on whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. But the next thing is I want to show you Jim's blog post. And if you haven't seen it, they're all on my website. I will share the link shortly, at least in Facebook. But hopefully you would have seen the links to the blog post. But this I thought was very powerful. An introvert struggles with anxiety, depression, and addiction. At the peak of my alcoholism, I was having severe panic attacks, suicidal thoughts, and hearing voices. Um, I would like to ask Jim to join us uh, to talk about this and to share what your experience has been like. Jim, first of all, thank you so much for writing that blog post and sharing those thoughts.
My
I
pleasure.
will let folks know when I first read it, my jaw hit the ground. I was just in awe, not just in terms of your experience, but also the fact that you would share it like that. Particularly being an introvert, it'd be very easy to just keep that under wraps. Um, so, tell us a little bit about kind of what's behind that experience. You cover everything in that quote. The alcoholism and the severe panic attacks, suicidal thoughts, hearing voices. Um, when did this start for you? How far back do you remember these being issues for you?
I remember my anxiety being an issue very early on in my life. My depression didn't come until I'd say my preteen years, but my anxiety, I remember instinctively as a little kid that when I knew that people were coming over or we had to go somewhere, it felt like my blood pressure was I could feel it inside me. And I, I, it, I would say that happened very early on. Like I said, sorry, nervous.
No.
You're
Um,
doing great. You're doing great.
I as far as the being an introvert, I remember very early on, I like to play alone a lot. Like I would even have my like play school little figurines and houses and stuff, and I would just sit there for hours and play, or I would just draw for hours by myself. And I always liked the solitude of that. The as bad as my thoughts can be sometimes, as mean as they can be to me, I need that time to rationalize it in my own head, and I can't. It's as you can see, it's very hard for me to verbalize properly. But
Jim, in your blog, you talked about how you knew really early on that you felt like how you felt was not like normal, like not how other kids feel. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I remember like going to parties like in grade school, like there'd be a Halloween party or someone would have a birthday party. And I never felt like I knew how to join in the conversations or start a conversation. I still struggle with that today. If I'm around people I'm only semi familiar with or not familiar with at all.
The other thing that when I was reading your blog that I just thought was fascinating, and I live with you, right? Is how you talked about your as you got later on in life and you started drinking, what you used alcohol to help you do as an introvert. So it'd be really interesting if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I discovered the power of alcohol probably when I was about 14 or 15. I don't remember my first drink. I don't remember what it was that made me do it, but I do remember the first time I drank that I fell in love with it. And I felt, okay, now this is how normal people feel now. Now I feel comfortable in my own skin. Now I'm able to talk to people. I could be the life of the party, the big talker in the room, and it seemed like everyone loved me and I loved everyone and everything was great. And I thought, okay, this is the way I'm supposed to be, because I didn't know that there were other people like me that were introverted. And like I said in my blog post, I mean, those words weren't used when I was younger, back in the 70s and 80s. They didn't say introvert and extrovert. I was always referred to as shy or weird. um, but yeah,
I,
Yeah, and
I want to.
when yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that you
go ahead.
saw the love from Becky Lucas. You got this, Jim. You got
Thanks,
this.
Becky, my sister.
Um, and oh, she's your sister.
Yep.
Good. Um, I just part of it, Don, and we're having this conversation. Um, I think that it's always helpful to take a breath and to just realize how incredible it is. I mean, it's one thing if you're sharing it with people you know and Dawn's friends and kind of your circle. Um, but you're also sharing it with my friends and my circle and all these people you don't know. I hope I'm not freaking you out.
No.
But but you are bringing so much hope to people, because there are people. We're going to go through the comments in a bit, but it's some people are extroverts, some people are introverts, some people are ambiverts, and I'd never heard that term before. Steve Taylor put that up, and we'll take a look at that. But just the fact that you're willing to lay it out there um, is is really powerful and really profound.
Thank you. I've always kind of been an open book about these things, but I've never been able to verbalize it, always writing it down, right? Which is why social media is perfect for somebody like me, because I don't have to be self-conscious about the way I'm talking or anything like that. And I can just write my feelings out there and I can press send and it's out there for everyone to see. And I'm totally fine with that. But like this is totally out of my wheelhouse, but I'm
but you're but you're
I'm
doing
glad
it,
I could be here.
and Kate gives you a so proud of you, Jim.
Thanks, Kate.
And again, Kate's another friend that I met when I was in Milwaukee. Um, my friend Stephen Kaplan, very brave and good of you to share your experience. We appreciate you, and yes, you've got this.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
so you're getting a lot of support.
Good. Good.
Um, let's take a look at what people are saying in the comments, Don, and then we'll come back to more of Jim's story. I want to go back up after I there we go. So we had Dr. Tachi watching from Fort Lauderdale. Thank you, as always. We had a few folks, kind of answering the question. So I'll just go in order as I saw the comments instead of trying to go back and forth. But Jonathan is an introvert. Basically, I've turned being a solo act into a style, and that's there is an art to solo dining. that I know Jonathan is written about. Solo traveling is another thing as well. Paula Kiger, a close friend of mine, dropped in to say hello. Thank you, Paula, another Digimentors colleague. Um, Rochelle, my neighbor from New York, from Hastings, and she did point out. So I was home when they first moved in, and she reminded me that I was one of the first to welcome her to the neighborhood back in '91. So if it was April '91, I graduated in June of that year and was gone. So um, Rochelle, thank you so much for reminding me. But she says that setting boundaries is difficult. And I think that was earlier in the conversation when I was talking about, uh, my own experience of being an extrovert, but also having work obligations. My friend Rose is watching from Connecticut. Thank you, Rose. She has a great show and a great social media presence focusing on women to follow. So you should check that out on all channels. Um, this is Steve Taylor talking about being an ambivert. So, Steve, I'm going to ask you when you come on the show, we can talk about it in detail. But in the comments, watching on YouTube, tell us a little bit more about what that means. Because I think I saw you shake. Not, you also hadn't heard the term before, right, Dawn?
No,
Yeah. So I'd love to hear more. Uh, Stefan is a major extrovert, but he's definitely toned it down with time spent in nature. And that's part of what he's going to talk about when he joins us. You can find Stefan on social media at Spin It Social. He's a social media strategist and great photographer, former photo editor for the New York Times. So check him out. Becky, help me understand this one. I don't know. You can maybe comment on this, Jim. An extroverted introvert. Um,
Well,
what do you know about that?
my sister is very extroverted, but she does value her alone time. Um, it's obviously not as introverted as I am to that extreme, but she does value her alone time, and I think she needs sometimes to just unpeople and deflate,
Mm.
that's
and I need a lot more of that than she does, which separates us. But she's actually a good mix of both. She's a
that's
very well
Brittany
rounded.
as well.
Yeah,
My
Brittany too.
daughter is that way as well. She's an extroverted introvert. So she's more extroverted than she is introverted, but she absolutely knows her boundaries and will say, "Okay, I've extroverted enough, and now it's time for me to take time for myself, and I'm going to go be alone for a while." Which I think is just such a great combination. I would love to know how
I
to
would
do
love that. I would love
that.
that.
Brian, a colleague of mine here at Mount Vernon Unitarian Church. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. And he was there at that meeting that I talked about on that was Tuesday evening. Brian, I stayed so late that night. Oh my God, I still am kicking myself for that. But he's an introvert. But again, these aren't, it's definitely not it's kind of, you can argue it's like gender. It's not a binary situation. It's not one or the other. There's a whole spectrum, as we're hearing just from people talking, and sharing their experiences. There's a lot of gray out there. Um, Dawn, Vicky is a friend of yours, I take it.
She is a friend of mine. Yeah, and she knows Brittany really well, and she too is a very good blend. She can turn on the extrovert whenever she needs to, but she knows when she needs to shut it off too.
And so she says she's with Brit as a blend, um, but sometimes she needs to crash into isolation to recover, which is really interesting. Um, And so Stefan Stairs says that even though he's toned it down as a major extrovert, I've been now known to now even talk um, with creatures all around me on my nature walks. I thank them all the time for making me smile and for their beauty. That I think is wonderful, Stefan. Uh, if you start telling us that they're talking back to you, I'm going to start getting a little worried. But I can't wait to have him on the show because not just using nature to help calm some of those issues, And then also I'm sure he'll share some of his photography as well, which is great. Pradnya Haldapur is a friend of mine here in the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, Virginia. She's sending greetings from Silver Spring. I want to take a moment and just acknowledge, Pradnya, you've shared so much on your own Facebook page about your struggles and challenges, and that partly gave me inspiration to do this show. Because as I mentioned earlier, and you may have, depending on when you joined, I, unlike Dawn, I can't talk. I couldn't talk about this on social media. I couldn't talk about this in a professional setting. It just didn't feel right to me. And it was seeing your posts, particularly in the fall, as after I started talking about this idea, it convinced me that this was the right thing to do. Um, and you're saying, Pradnya is saying she's an introvert in a profession that requires talking to people. Uh, Pradnya is in fundraising, so it definitely is a challenging thing there. My sister, I used to be such an extrovert, and gradually she's become more of an introvert. So that's an interesting kind of, not just people are different parts of the spectrum. You're not in one position. Things will change over time. I'd be curious to see if anyone goes in the other direction, though. Dawn, do you know anyone who's gone from being an introvert to becoming an extrovert?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think that would be really, really difficult.
It
Because
would
I would
be.
say that even I think Jim would agree that even though I'm an extrovert, I can now
No.
sit down and watch a full movie without being on my phone or having to do something else, which I could not do previously. Like I really could not sit and watch an entire movie without having to do something while I was watching the movie. So there's my little piece of introvert.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, and My mom is a mix of an extrovert and introvert. Um, I don't know that I'd actually thought about that before. So that's interesting. Brittany says she's the same as Becky earlier. Um, Apollo says I used to drink into the universe to manage my anxiety and panic. Now not so much, with a doctor and the appropriate the appropriate medicine to help him along. So that is an interesting point. People turning to alcohol and other substances to manage some of this. Um, we've got a lot more comments, Dawn. This is probably more engagement we've had than the first two shows. Jonathan, a lot of introverts create a character to play in social situations, so they seem to be extroverts. Jim, that's what you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
You kind of played that role.
I kind of played that role, and in a way, it almost came natural to me. It wasn't so much a conscious role I was playing. The alcohol literally turned me into an extrovert, but it wasn't who I was. That's the thing. It turned me into this great social person, made lots of jokes. Everyone loves me. I love everybody. But that was false. That was substances that was doing that. Um, I'm very thankful that I totally got out of that, because it it started out that way for me, to be more extroverted and talk to people. But as my alcoholism got worse and worse through the years, I became more and more isolated. I stayed in my place and just drank myself into oblivion. I didn't want to be around other people. So it kind of set me back to not only being an introvert, but also gave me a lot of bad side effects, like the panic attacks and the voices. And it was a very, I would say the last 5 years were really horrible years that I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. That it was very hopeless, very hopeless.
The last 5 years before you
The last 5 years of my drinking,
of
yes.
your drinking, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, it's I mean, I there's so many things that we can kind of identify with and relate to. I'll share that that's the one thing I can't connect with. In that, Pam and I don't drink. My wife and I both don't drink. But there have been many times when we've been, when I've dealt with anxiety, when I've dealt with the depression, you know, the thought has crossed, oh my God, if I did actually drink, it would get really bad. Because it would be really easy to go down that road. Um, it's just something I never started when I was in high school and never picked up
That's
later.
good.
Um, Steve says, I get energy from and am also drained by the activities that traditionally separately affect introverts and extroverts. And My mom says, your story will help others realize and talk about their own issues. Um, so it really, I mean, that's, the inspiration that you can offer people is really, really great. Um, Another friend of mine, Rahadyan, is joining us late. Good evening from Long Island. So I'll take this opportunity to mention we're not too deep into the show. I mean, we're just past the halfway point. But if you did join us late, you can watch the show from the beginning, uh, right when we're done. So if when you finish the show, you can watch from the beginning on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. It'll take me a little while to get the videos up on Instagram. You can watch it on our website right from the very beginning to catch the full show. So thank you, Rahadian, for joining us, and appreciate your being here. Um, and We just have a few more. Um, some really good comments.
There's so
Jim,
many. There's so many.
you
I don't think we can go through them all, or we're gonna lose time with Jim too.
I know, I know. Um, I'm just going to pull in Steve's comment. As someone dealing with alcohol use disorder, bipolar, anxiety, and ADHD, as well as a number of other DSM entries, this conversation is so helpful. I just want to kind of leave
Acknowledge
that
that. Yeah.
for you. Um, so let's take this into a little bit different direction, if you don't mind. You two are engaged. You live together. Um, Jim is a super introvert. Dawn is a super extrovert. How do you deal with? How do you actually make that work?
It's easy.
It's easy.
We can't explain it. We've tried to dissect it and figure it out. And when you're with the right person, it just all falls into place like that. I mean, it's not any work we put into it as far as that part of our relationship. I don't think at all, right? Wouldn't you agree?
No, yeah, we've talked about it a lot. How, Jim said that he's never been with anyone that he wanted to be with like all the time. And I think I'm speaking for you, Jim, but you've said like that's really odd for him. And for me, like I just kind of know when he needs to quiet time, or when he needs to just like watch a movie. And we kind of like, I go off on my Sundays and run errands and spend time with friends, and that's his time to just chill and relax. And it just kind of works. It just kind of works for us. um but not that, I mean, I think he'll admit that I probably suck a lot of energy out of him. um and there are definitely times where I'm like, Jim, are you listening to me, or did you tune me out? And he'll be like, honestly, I just had to stop. I had to stop listening for a few minutes, because I will suck the energy right out of him.
Well, I got so much going in my head all the time, right? My anxiety is, and being an introvert, I don't verbalize it all the time. So I'm always in my head, and I got all these voices, not like the alcoholic voices, but all these voices in my head, and all these, like I explained to Dawn, it's like I have 10 TVs on all the time in my head with 10 different shows. And I just try to keep the volume down and it kind of somewhat pay attention to each one. And then sometimes when it's an overload and she'll tell me about her day and about her job, and I'll really start out listening to her in the beginning, and she'll just keep talking and talking about like work terms and words I'm not familiar with the context she's using them in. And then I just completely tune out, and she catches me. She always knows. She always
But
knows.
but I think the important piece about that is because we understand each other, it isn't like he's not listening to me. It's just that he gets to a point where he can't. And I understand that and respect that and know that I have to, like, I need to pull back. Like I'm just being too much right now. And I'm okay with that. And there's no, because I think we understand that about each other, it's, and we've acknowledged that is what it is, that there's no hurt feelings, there's no, anger or resentment. It's just kind of like, you know what, I'm going to let you do what you need to do right now, and I'm going to, continue to make dinner, and we'll pick this up a little bit later when you can focus more. So
I think something Jim said earlier really kind of was interesting. Uh, when I think of, I don't have to think far. I can look at my wife in terms of thinking of an introvert. You know, to me, it's that idea of someone who needs the quiet, who wants to just kind of be kind of contained and not bouncing around and talking to so many people. I mean, I think a great example, uh frankly, was at church one day during coffee hour. She spent the whole time talking to one person. I touched base with at least 10 people in that same period, right? And talked about different projects and different things going on, and shared this, shared that. um but Jim, you mentioned this idea of having 10 different channels going on at the same time. I picture that bank of TVs that you see, like, in like the president's suite or
Yeah,
something, or
that's exactly
right.
how it's in my head like that. Yeah.
And so that actually kind of gave me a different perspective, the idea of why you need to be an introvert, or why you need to kind of bring everything kind of down. um it's almost like, I mean, you can always think of it as we maybe we each have the capacity of having 10 TVs going on at the same time, right? You've got 10 of them in your head, or maybe it's 11, so you have one more, like you could talk to one person. If I only have one TV going on in my head, and I don't know if that's the case or not, but I can go talk to 10 people and be that, kind of bouncing around. Don, what is that? How do you relate to that? What do you think? Does that
yeah, yeah,
work for you?
yeah, yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jim always says to me, "You would not want to be in my head." Like, and we call it squirreling. Like he will squirrel. Like he will go do one thing, and then all of a sudden, he's like drying dishes, and then the next thing I know, he's like cleaning out the cabinet. And I'm like, wait a minute, weren't you just doing dishes? And he'll be like, I know, but I saw this like sparkly thing over here, and that's where my attention went to. And we laugh about it, but I think about it from his perspective. And I think sometimes that's maddening, right? You just,
Mhm.
I think he wants to, he wants to scream sometimes from all that's going on in his head. And I'll let you speak to that, Jim, because this is not
Yeah,
about me.
I want to scream all the time. Um, not all the time, but yeah, when my TVs get really loud in my head, I just want to scream, and I just want to take a sledgehammer and destroy all the TVs.
Wow.
Um, and thankfully, I got Dawn, who is very good at recognizing when I'm getting to that point, and she'll maybe just do something as simple as just come up to me and give me a big hug, and I can just feel all the anxiety completely drained from me. And I think we're both pretty good at knowing where the other one is in their head. I can tell when she's in her head, and she can tell when I'm in my head. She gets really quiet when she's in her head, and she's never quiet. So I know I know if she's just like sitting there, like if I'm talking to her and she's answering me like, yeah, uh-huh. I'm like, okay, what's wrong? She'll go, how'd you know? I'm like, well, it's pretty obvious to me. You're not talking, so
Yeah,
Well,
isn't that an odd juxtaposition, right? Like when I'm like really anxious or upset, I get quiet, and that's just a woo, like a scary scary. You don't want me to be quiet.
no, no,
That means there's
no.
something
Yeah,
desperately
I
wrong.
just hope it isn't me that you're being quiet about.
No, usually not.
Usually not.
as we're
My
we're
dad's watching.
talking,
I just want to say hi,
I know
Dad.
I was going to bring him in. I was going to,
Hi,
go
Dad.
back to comments. So Peter Flagg Senior, where does he live?
He lives here
Right.
in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
That's right.
Um and but I actually sent him the link via text because he was like, I don't know how to watch you. Because he's 85, and so he managed to get on,
But he,
so I'm
but he
so
found
excited.
it on
Yep, he found
Facebook, so that
yay.
works. That's
Yay,
good.
Dad. Yay, Dad.
Um, so a few I want to bring in before we go to more comments, because we're talking about alcoholism and depression, anxiety. Uh, want to share that we each bring different skills to the table. We each have our own background. Dawn is a researcher, and works at United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County. That's how I got to know her there. So every show, she's looking at data that is relevant to this particular conversation. Here's a tidbit that she found. You want to share a little bit about this, Dawn?
Yeah, so when I was doing my research, I really found that there's really like no link to being an introvert and depression and anxiety, or being an extrovert and depression and anxiety. It doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum. All of us have the potential to experience depression and anxiety. Um, but there is a link to alcoholism and depression and anxiety, and 1 out of every 3 alcoholics has experienced episodes of intense depression and or severe anxiety, and this comes from the National Library of Medicine. So I'm going to say that again: 1 out of every 3 alcoholics has experienced episodes of intense depression and or severe anxiety. So just take that into note. The other piece that I thought was really interesting, and I know Jim can attest to this, is that people misunderstand introvert introverts and anxiety. Those are not the same thing. Introverts can experience anxiety, but just because you're an introvert doesn't mean you have social anxiety. Just because you prefer to be alone doesn't mean that you don't want to go out and see people. It's and so I wanted to make sure to clarify that as well.
Sure, sure. I want to go back and clarify a comment that our friend Apollo made. Um, he was saying that I used to drink into the next universe to manage my anxiety and panic, not so much with the doctor and the appropriate dope to ferry me along. I made the reference to dope as in meds, or the connection, but Apollo clarified it's dope as in psychiatric care is what he was referring to. So I want to make sure we bring that up. Um, as far as a couple other comments, Rahadian shared that he doesn't drink anymore due to the antidepressants that he's on, but I would misuse alcohol in the past. I'm glad those days are behind me. We're glad as well, Rahadian. Jim, in terms of your journey, have has therapy or medication played a role? I know that my mom
Medication,
was asking
yeah.
about therapy.
No, I've haven't done therapy.
Hmm.
But I am on proper medication that works.
But
Um,
a wasn't AA
yeah,
instrumental in the
I did
beginning?
AA for 6 years, which is definitely a form of therapy. When I first
Absolutely.
got sober, I did AA. I did it religiously. I went to 3 or 4 meetings a week. Um,
Wow.
and it was my way to get out my stuff, to get out all this ick in me. And I was surrounded by other people who were the same way, you know. And so that was definitely a form of therapy. And I remember near the end of me going to AA, just wasn't getting anything out of it anymore. I got to the point where I felt like I said everything I need to say. I've heard everyone else's stories, and there's nothing more that the program was really doing for me. And I went to my sponsor and I said, you know, I'm not getting anything out of this anymore. And he goes, you know what, Jim? It's AA is different for everybody. And he said, you may be an alcoholic, you may not be an alcoholic, but this in AA, they really preach like you have to go here every day for the rest of your life or you're going to start drinking again. And my sponsor, when I was when he said, that's absolutely not true. Everybody is different. We are not all the same. And I mean, that was 5 to 6 years of going to AA religiously. And I haven't been to AA in what, 14 years, 15 years,
And 20 years sober.
20 years sober, which is
pretty
pretty awesome when I
solid.
think
Yep.
about it. I try not to think about it too much, and I don't talk about it too much because then I feel like I'm tooting my own horn or like, and I know it doesn't come off that way, but that's the way I feel. But I've always made it clear to other people that I am here for them. If I'm just a message away, just a text away, if you need any advice or you just need someone to talk to who you think understands, that I'm there for them. And I've always left that open.
And Jim's always been incredibly candid about his alcoholism and how important it was that he got sober and how he would not be with us today if he did not get sober. So I am so thankful for that because I get to marry you in a couple of months and I'm so grateful for your sobriety.
Well, I'll say, Jim, on that note, I am thankful for your sobriety and your being in Dawn's life because I know how much you mean to her, and I know how much, this last 2 years, is it
2.5.
2.5
Yeah.
years, the impact you've had, the stability that you've brought her, the just unconditional love that you have for her. Uh, as a third party seeing it, I know how important that is. So, thank you.
Thank you for
for
saying
that.
that.
Rahadian says that for a year I was in therapy groups at a particular venue to address different concerns. It was cathartic and draining. I'd go back to wherever I was living and I had to take a long nap afterward. Jim, what do you do on Sundays after?
When Dawn leaves, I put on a movie and I play on my phone, and that is it. And sometimes I'll be watching a movie and my brain will be over the TV shows will all be on and I'll have to pause the movie and just calm myself down. And I'm like, okay, now I can get back to my movie because there'll be times I'm watching the movie and the shows in my head are way more loud than the TV. And
Jim doesn't leave the house on Sundays.
I try not to leave the house. And Sundays is my extreme introvert day. Fridays and Saturdays, I let Dawn take me out on the town and socialize, and
But you need that day.
Yeah, I mean, Dawn will tell you, when we first met, like if we would go grocery shopping, and she'd be like, "Well, let's stop at Kohl's too, because there's something I want to look at." I'd be like, "I don't want to do two things in one day," And now our Fridays and Saturdays are just like completely packed.
Yeah. Brittany said earlier, since I started student teaching, my social time with friends has depleted me immensely. I use all my social time at school, don't feel up for human interaction with my friends afterwards. So that, that mix, that blend, being an extrovert, but then needing to kind of recharge. I want to thank so many people for watching and commenting, and there are conversations going on, between my sister and Rahadian and your dad. It's just really great to see. and apparently there's some comments about how many chocolate chip cookies I used to eat. I'm not putting any of that on screen. That's going to stay offline. If you're on Facebook, if you're watching on my Facebook channel, you're watching that conversation. We don't need to share that with the world. But I do want to bring in Rochelle's recommendation on the book Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. So you talking about yourself, Dawn?
Yup.
And it's me as well. I mean, I'll cop to it. And again, in talking about that dynamic at home, at the end of the day, Pam needs her time. So for her, it's not the Sunday, but it's the end of the day. It's after Emily, our daughter's gone to bed, and after things are done. She, whatever time it is, she needs another hour, hour and a half of quiet, and she'll stay up past when I'm staying up just to get away from me. She just, just don't bother me. Just let me have my quiet time so she can recharge and get back to the day. And that's when I'm talking to her and I'm wanting to connect and etc. So it's always interesting when you have somewhat opposites. Rahadian gives you a big congratulations for 20 years
Thank you.
of sobriety,
Thank
and
you.
certainly want to acknowledge that. Anne Burnell, friend of yours, I assume, Dawn or Jim?
Yeah.
Friend of mine.
Yeah, Jim's.
Toot that horn. Congrats on all that you've accomplished.
Thanks, Anne.
Toot that horn. Absolutely. Apollo says, Dawn and Jim, congratulations on being married or getting married. For people with mental health challenges, maintaining relationships is an issue, and you give me hope. You make me hope, which is great. Rahadian is suggesting the graphic novel Watchmen, but you're like Ozymandias, except you're not trying to change the world through destroying it. The multiple TVs
Not yet.
elicited the image. Not yet. Not yet.
Night's still young.
Iffy.
I want to make sure we get to some of the resources that we share with people in each episode. So this is a graphic from NAMI that reminds people that you're not alone. And Dawn, if there's a particular stat here that you want to call out.
Yeah. I mean, it says 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness, but that 8% of adults have a co-occurring substance use disorder and mental illness, I think is really appropriate for this particular show.
Absolutely. And, knowing that, people may be watching on their phones or, if their screen, they may not be able to see the graphic, but you can get more information if you go to nami.org. We also have the same graphic on our website if you're interested. But you can go to nami.org. They also have a helpline, 1-800-950-6264. Again, 1-800-950-6264, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So I want to thank them for putting this graphic together. Also want to share this resource from Mental Health America. These data points and of the some of the stats that really stand out for me. 28% of all adults with a mental illness reported they were not able to receive the treatment they needed. Most reported they did not receive care because they could not afford it. So in my case, I do see a therapist. I can afford it. I'm thankful for that. You've been able to get the meds that you need, Jim, that have been helpful to you. Dawn, you've had access to healthcare and been able to get the help. So very, very thankful for that. Another interesting stat on this graphic, 23% of adults who report experiencing 14 or more mentally unhealthy days each month. And repeat that, 14 or more mentally unhealthy days each month. So almost half the month we're not able to see a doctor due to costs, which is, really challenging to think about the impact that it has on society and, the workplace. So you can find more information from Mental Health America. They have a website MHNational, MHAnational.org for Mental Health America National. They also have a 988lifeline.org if you need to reach out for help. So definitely encourage you to check that out. The last resource that we shared on this show is this graphic from RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. They have a national hotline, 800-656-HOPE. Their website is RAINN.org. We put this up every 68 seconds. An American is sexually assaulted. Because both Don and I have experience with assault and abuse with that kind of trauma. And it really informs a lot of what we do and a lot of what we talk about. So if folks need to reach out to any of these organizations, please do so. Please make sure to get the help you need.
Can you believe we are at 7:01, Neil? Isn't that crazy how quickly that went?
Long, and there's so many comments, but I do want to make a few quick announcements before we start wrapping up. Uh, our next show is going to be March 28th. Brian Miller is going to be our guest. Now, Brian Miller is a former New York Times restaurant critic. He was actually back in the late 80s, I think 90s, on top of the world. He was running that town, and it all came crashing down because of his severe depression, and he wanted to kill himself. He lost his house, his job, his wife, his marriage, and he'll share with us that story. And I had the pleasure of interviewing him for Sri's Sunday New York Times read along, our Sunday show that we do, and I had dinner with him when I was in Hastings back in November. So we're looking forward to having him join us March 28th. I want to remind folks that the show is produced with pro bono support from Digimentors. So thank you again to all my Digimentors colleagues for watching and supporting the show, but also our leadership for putting in the resources to make this happen. Um, and our final comments are last things that we want to show on the screen. Rochelle is talking about NAMI, how wonderful a resource they are. They provide support, information, a helpline, and education for individuals and families impacted by mental health. And Jonathan says, I've had rather bad luck with therapy. I suspect that's not unique. Jonathan, I'm sorry to hear that. I know that it takes a while to find a therapist that is a good match. You need to work through a few people. But if you layer in insurance issues and coverage issues, I'm sure it can be very frustrating. So I hope you have a chance, if you are still looking for help, that you have a chance to keep at it. Um, and Stefan says that this was incredibly meaningful and powerful discussion. Health, happiness, and peace of mind to all. See you not next week, but 2 weeks from now, because we do the show the second and fourth Thursdays of the month.
I need to just thank Jim before
Why
we
why don't you
before we
go ahead and thank him?
I
Go
I I just need to thank
go thank him. Dawn's pulling an audible because she's in the same house and she's gonna just thank Jim, and I fully endorse that.
Love you.
If I could do that, I would
Great
come
job.
over and give you a hug as well.
Come on, Neil. Bring it.
My mom says it was a great show, and Rahadian says thank you for a great show as well. So Dawn, we're getting some kudos from my mom and Rahadian, and again, thank you everyone for joining us. We are live the second and fourth Thursdays of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. And we're going to keep doing this as we find guests and people. We're looking to have some therapists on the show as well, some advocates, in addition to people sharing their own experiences. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes and how people will relate to it. Uh, with that, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you the next time we're on the air.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye.